Hi, it's Feature from Sewmate. Welcome to my channel. If you want to see how I make these wide leg palazzo pants, please stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do, and make sure to turn on your notification bell so that each time I upload new videos you get notified. You will need a basic pant block pattern to do this. I've got a tutorial on this channel on how you can make one. I'll leave a link in the description below and a link above as well. So starting with the front pant, trace around your block as usual, making sure to mark all the notches and the dot. Lift your block, draw in your dot, draw in your grain line, square in your hip line, your knee line, and your ankle line. Make sure to extend it both ways like I'm doing here. Now square a line down from the hip line to the new ankle line we've just drawn. Make sure it's completely squared. Now measure this distance and make sure to transfer it to the other side, exactly the same distance, and square line up. Now extend your knee line both ways as well. Now from this point you're going to square a line up to the knee line. At the crotch point here, we're going to lower it down by 1.5 centimeters and extend it out by 2 centimeters to increase a bit of ease there, since we're making a wide-legged pant, which is a palazzo pant. Join these 2 points with a nice curve, and we're going to join this point to the hip line, like I'm doing here. So I'm not gonna use this part anymore. I'm just adding length to my pants from my ankle to the floor length. Just measure yours from your ankle to the floor length and just add the extension there, or you can even decide to leave it as is. Now adding the hem allowance, 3 centimeters. Extending my grain line. We're going to cut through this grain line and spread it open. So we'll be closing our dot. Now cutting around the pattern. And cutting through the grain line and one leg of the dot. Closing the dot and taping everything down nicely. Get a fresh pattern paper and put it under your pattern like I'm doing here. Tape everything down. With your curved ruler, just close this hemline like I'm doing here. Now we're going to measure from this point to this point. Just measure that distance and write it down. Cutting around the pattern. Measure and mark halfway the spread distance. and just join it to the top part of the dart where we close the dart to put in our grain line like I'm doing here. Next, we're going to measure down 6 centimeters from the top of the waistline to mark for our waistband. Follow it through all the way, making sure to square at the side seam and at the front crotch. Now go 6 centimeters in from the side seam and put a mark, and go a further 5 centimeters and put another mark. Then along the side seam go 14 centimeters, put a mark, and join these 2 points with a straight line like I'm doing here. Now measure 10 centimeters from the bottom part of the pocket and square another straight line. Now using this point, square a line across like I'm doing here, and square another line down from the point that we marked before. Draw in a nice curve. Now cutting around the pattern to remove the waistband piece there. I'm just gonna label the center front so that I don't get confused later when I'm working on it and the side seam. Get a fresh pattern paper and we're going to add a seam allowance to the top of the pattern so we can join it with the waistband later. 1 centimeter seam allowance and cut around the pattern. Adding a seam allowance at the top of the pocket and around the edges of the pocket, 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now get a fresh pattern paper, fold it in half and put it under your pocket so we can trace around the pocket like we're doing with the tracing wheel. Get the pattern paper out and cut around the pattern, following through the tracing wheel marks that we left on there. Now adding grain lines to the pocket pieces. And labeling, pocket bag, cut 1 pair and I put my initial. Pocket facing, cut 1 pair and I put my initial. The pocket pieces are finished. We're gonna put them on the side for now. Now we're going to cut this part out, we don't need it, and adding notches to the pattern. Labeling the front pattern piece, front pant, cut 1 pair and I put my initial. Then we're going to finish off our front waistband piece. I'm going to take off the 1 centimeter seam allowance that's added on my block for the crotch seam there, since we're going to put this part on fold. So cutting it off 1 centimeter and labeling the pattern piece, front waistband, cut 2 on fold, plus 1 fusing on fold 2. And I put my initial. Adding the grain line parallel to the center front and also adding a seam allowance there, joining seam allowance 1 centimeter. And cutting around the pattern. Our front pant patterns are finished. Now moving on to the back. press around the block, making sure to mark all the notches and the dart. Lift the block, draw in your dart, square in your hip line, knee line, and ankle line, making sure to extend it further both ways like we did with the front. Now extend your trouser to your desired length like you did with the front. Square a line down from the dart tip to the bottom line there. We're going to be slashing and spreading through this line here. Add the same distance we put for the front on both sides. Extending the knee line both ways. Squaring up the same point to the knee line. And squaring the same to the hip line as well on the other side. Now adding the hem allowance 3 centimeters, and we're going to close this dart out, extending out the crotch line 2 centimeters and down 1.5 centimeters to add ease to the pants. Square a line across like I'm doing. Join these 2 points with a curved ruler like I'm doing here now. Extending this line a little longer and joining it down to the hip line. Now cutting around the pattern. And cutting through the slash line as well and one leg of the dart, closing the dart, tapping everything down nicely, putting on a fresh pattern paper under the pattern and tapping everything down. Now closing off my hemline there and the hem allowance. Measure this part that we spread. Now draw in another slash line at the back of your pant pattern piece. This will allow us to add the difference that we have between the front and back pant pieces. So we'll slash through this line and spread it with the difference that we have. So get your front pattern, you remember this point that we marked and we measured there, get the difference. Whatever you get is what you are going to spread at the second line. So mine is 8.5 centimeters, it will be different for everyone. Now just adding a fresh pattern paper under my pattern piece. Now measuring 8.5 centimeters and square line down, extend it a little further. Now align the edge of your pattern piece with this line like I've done here and tap everything down like I'm doing. Close off the hem allowance and the hemline. Now coming to the back crotch, we're going to put an extension for our zipper. Measure 19 centimeters down from the top and put a notch, which is our zipper notch, and go a further 2 to 2.5 centimeters and put another notch. Square line across, and I'm going to add 1 centimeter for my zipper extension there because I already have another 1 centimeter seam allowance there. You can add as much as you want, whatever you're comfortable with. Now cutting around the pattern. Drawing in my waistband for the back, 6 centimeters down, and labeling the side seam so that I don't get confused. Now adding the joining seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. And cutting around the pattern. Now measure and mark half your hemline. Join this with the original grain line point at the waistline. Put in your grain line, adding notches to the pattern and labeling the pattern, back pant, cut 1 pair, and I put my initial. Putting this pattern on the side and adding a joining seam allowance to the waistband piece as well, 1 centimeter. And labeling the pattern piece, back waistband, cut 2 pairs plus 1 pair fusing, and I put my initial, adding the grain line parallel to the center back, and our back pattern pieces are finished as well. All our patterns are finished. Now moving on to sewing. Now moving on to sewing our palazzo pants. What you need are your completed patterns, your fabric, your zipper, and your cutting tools. So for the fabric, I'm going to be using this beautiful printed silk fabric. You actually benefit from using a nice flowy fabric for your pants because they are quite wide, okay? So now let's move on to cutting our fabrics. So all our pattern pieces are cut and ready to sew. So the first step would be for us to interface 1 set of our waistband pieces. So we've got 2 sets of waistband pieces. So one of the sets we've got to interface it, and I've done that already for mine. So whilst they are still arranged like that, I'm just gonna take a moment and just pin along the side seams. So we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and sew along the side seams here with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. When we finish that, we're gonna take this interfaced one and we're going to overlock from the center back seam all the way down the bottom edge back to the other center back seam. Okay, so we're putting this on the side for now. Get your 2 front pant pieces, lay them on the table with the right side facing up. Now we're gonna take our pocket facing pieces and we're going to lay them right side facing down along this edge here for the pocket. In along the edges. So now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and sew along this seam here with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. When we finish that, we're going to understitch this pocket. So just get the pocket piece, roll it on top of the seam allowance that we left done there, and just sew a tiny stitch along the pocket side. Okay, we're gonna do that for both so that it can sit properly inside the palazzo pants. Okay, so let's go and do both the stages. Okay, so that's done. We finished sewing on our waistband pieces and I overlocked the interfaced one at the bottom like I said, and I also sew the other waistband piece. Okay, we put this on the side for now. We managed to sew on our pockets as you can see, and we did a bit of understitching, and I went ahead and ironed them nicely so they can sit nicely inside the pants. Next, we're going to take our pocket bags and we're going to be laying them down with the right side facing down. Make sure you're matching the pocket facing edge nicely for both and pin along. So now we're going to take both to the sewing machine and we're going to attach these two together, make a seam here and overlock it. When we finish, we're going to attach our pocket to the pant side like this and just make a stitching from this point all the way down to the end of the pocket. Make sure you do a seam allowance that's inside your seam, okay? So I'm using a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on this side. I can use 0.5 or I can use 1 centimeter so that the stitching will be inside our main stitching line, okay? Do the same at the top edge here. Just attach the pocket to the top edge of our pants like this. Let's go and do that for both sides. Okay, so we finished sewing on our pockets and overlocked the whole edge, and we also went ahead and attached the pocket to the top and to the side seam. Okay, so everything is intact now. Next, take both your front pieces, lay them one on top of the other, right sides facing. So we'll take this to the sewing machine and sew along the crotch seam here from the top to the bottom with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and we're going to overlock that seam as well. Then we're going to take both our back pieces, lay them one on top of the other, right side facing as well. So locate the notches that you put to signal the end of your zipper, and you're going to pin along the whole crotch seam from that end of zipper notch. Now take this to the sewing machine and just start sewing from the end of zipper notch all the way down to the end of the crotch. So let's do that for both the front and back and overlock both seams. Okay, now so we've done that. We finished sewing our crotch seams and overlocking them. We did the same at the back. Sewn the crotch seam and left it open for the zipper here. So now we're going to lay our front and back pants right sides facing. And we're going to pin along the side seams and the inseams. Next, we're going to pin along the whole inseam like that, okay? Now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and sew along the side seams and the inseam and overlock both. Let's do that. Okay, now so we've sewn the side seams and the inseam. So now turn your pant to the right side like I've done here. So now with your pants facing up, we're going to take our facing piece, one that's not interfaced, and we're going to match the bottom edge here with the top edge of our pant. Match everything up and just pin along. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew right around the waist seam here. Let's go and do that. Okay, now, so next we're going to sew on our zipper at the back crotch seam here. So what we're going to do is to go ahead and sew the seam closed from the top of the waistband all the way down to the double notches. Just sew with the longest stitch on your sewing machine, okay? Let's go and do that. So I've done that and I went ahead and ironed the seam open. So with your pants wrong side up, we're going to take the invisible zipper and we're going to make sure to leave a 2.5 centimeter extension beyond the zipper notch, and we're just going to lay it down on the seam here and just pin it along the seam allowance. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew the first step, which is to attach the zipper tape to the zipper allowance. After that, we'll switch on to our zipper foot and finish off sewing our invisible zipper. Let's do that. Okay, now so I finished sewing on the zipper through the back of our pants like this. So I'm going to cut off the zipper tape. Now with your pants right sides up, what we're going to do now is to get the other set of our waistband piece. We're going to match it along the waistline, making sure to start with the zipper open like this. And we're going to match the back crotch, pin it along. Then we're going to pin along the whole waistline, matching our side seams. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew from here all the way around back to the zipper allowance again. Let's go and do all that. Okay, so we've done that. We went ahead and sew all around, and I also did an understitching right around the whole waistline. So now we're going to turn the waistband to the right side. First we're going to snip a bit at the corners here to reduce the bulk. Now turn it over to the right side. Now we're going to take this to the iron and iron everything nice and flat, making sure that this seam allowance inside is going to be ironed upwards so that it can be covered by this facing at the end of it. Okay, let's go and do that. Okay, now so I've ironed everything down nice and flat. So the next thing we're going to do is to attach the facing to the pant. So we're going to do a stitch in the ditch on the right side, making sure to catch everything at the back and make sure the seam allowance is ironed upwards so that we can cover everything inside. Okay, after that, just go ahead and hem your pants. So what we're going to do is to overlock right round and then just do a top stitched hem for both sides. Let's do that. Okay, now so our palazzo pants are finished and I'm so happy with the results. Thank you.